All right, good morning, good evening, whenever you happen to be watching this. We're still looking at the post-war United States, and a lot of this is actually going to be politics. But what we're looking at today specifically is we're looking at something called the Red Scare that happened immediately after World War II. Okay? So the Red Scare, if you remember, we had one of these after World War I. Well, this is going to be the same thing. This is going to be a fear of communist infiltration in the government, but it's also a fear of communist subversion of American society. So we're afraid that the Soviet Union is out trying to undermine what it is that it means to be an American. This is the one that is more well known. So if you get a test question that says that it just says the Red Scare, it's referring to this one right here after World War II. The reason this is so much more well known is because this is going to kind of help define politics and society after World War II. So much is going to be affected by this. During this Red Scare, the government, and you have different arms of the government, you have the FBI, the CIA, but also the House and Senate. They will launch committees where they will investigate a variety of people, including government employees, college professors, and Hollywood celebrities, in addition to others that they feel have communist ties or communist sympathies. Now, in order to combat communism here in the United States, the government is going to institute a couple of different programs. The first one is called the Loyalty Review Program. This is created to have the FBI screen all federal employees. If you have a government job, you're a federal employee, the FBI would go through and they would investigate you. They investigated everyone, looking for something in their background that indicated they had communist leanings of some kind or communist sympathies. Those people that were alleged communists, they would be fired. People that were alleged to be spies would be fired, but also potential spies. People that may in the future one day become spies. And what the FBI did is they would look into your background and they would find something that maybe you wanted hidden. Okay? This is the 1940s and 1950s. So people who were homosexual, that is something that most people were not out with yet. And so you might have a wife and kids and still be gay. Well, you didn't want anybody to know that. And the FBI, if the FBI could find it, the thinking was the Soviet Union could find it, and the next thing you know, they're threatening to make this information public unless you spy for them. So homosexuals in the government were fired. Single women were fired because they feared that they might be susceptible to becoming spies for the Soviet Union. Congress also passed something called the McCarthy Act, which required all communist organizations to register with the government. It also required individual members of those organizations to register with the government. So there was a communist party in the United States. It had to register with the government. All their members had to register. And you would get an actual identification card. So if you've ever heard the term a card-carrying communist, this is where this comes from. The House of Representatives had a committee within it. It's called the House Un-American Activities Committee. We pronounce the abbreviation as HUAC. H-U-A-C, HUAC, House Un-American Activities Committee. It had actually been created in the 30s. They investigated fascists and people that had sympathies toward Germany or Italy before World War II. But really when we talk about it is here after World War II during the Red Scare, because HUAC is going to hold multiple hearings where they interrogate people that have suspected ties to communism. One of the members of HUAC in the 40s is this man named Richard Nixon. Okay, depending on what order you've watched these videos in, he later becomes vice president. But during the 40s, he is in Congress, and he is on the House Un-American Activities Committee. And he really makes a name for himself among the people by going after these people that are suspected of being communists. A lot of people who were called before this committee, once you got called before the committee, your career was pretty much over, regardless of whether or not you did have those communist sympathies. Some people were communists. Paul Robeson, if you remember him from the Harlem Renaissance notes, he was a supporter of communism. Whether or not he actually joined the Communist Party is up for debate. But he traveled to the Soviet Union in the 30s, and he said he felt like he was treated equally there. Remember, he is opposed to racism. But his career was ruined because of his association with communism. There's also a group called the Hollywood 10. They were the first 10 writers and directors who would be blacklisted by Hollywood. In other words, they were not able to find work. People in Hollywood did not want to hire them because of their association with potentially being communists. Another guy that had his career ruined is this guy, Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss was a employee in the State Department. He was really important in the State Department. He had been instrumental in helping to create the United Nations. When the first meeting to first establish the United Nations, happened, he chaired the meeting. So he's very important. And he was accused of being a spy by this guy named Whittaker Chambers. Whittaker Chambers was a reporter, and he had been a member of the Communist Party and had apparently changed his mind. And when Whittaker Chambers testified before HUAC, he said, yes, I was recruited as a spy for the Soviet Union. I no longer am spying, but here's who all I was working with. And he named Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss, of course, denied it. No, I'm not a spy. Whittaker Chambers came back and produced documents that came from the State Department. Many of them were classified. And Whittaker Chambers said these documents had been passed to him by Alger Hiss. These are referred to as the Pumpkin Papers because at one point Whittaker Chambers had testified that he hid them in a hollowed out pumpkin. So it was cute to call them the Pumpkin Papers then. But these documents pretty much convinced HUAC and the American people that Alger Hiss had been a spy. Many of them were documents that many other people had access to. So the idea that Alger Hiss was the only one that could have passed these, that's circumstantial. Later on, many, many years later, when the government declassified things, there were several documents that actually were classified that only Alger Hiss and a handful of others would have had access to. Now, eventually, Alger Hiss, he was never convicted of spying, but he was convicted of perjury, which is lying under oath. He swore that he had never seen Whittaker Chambers. Whittaker Chambers produced evidence that, yes, they had been. They did know each other. And later on, Alger Hiss had to come back and admit, yes, I did know this person more than what he had admitted to before. Later investigations, decades later, helped prove that Alger Hiss was indeed a spy for the Soviet Union. How much information he gave them versus others, that's kind of up for debate. But he was a communist agent. One of the more famous cases involving American citizens is the case of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. The Rosenbergs, they were private citizens, and they were accused of spying for the Soviet Union. Here's a picture of Ethel and Julius after their arrest. They allegedly, what made their crime so horrible, was they allegedly gave the Soviets information on how to build an atomic bomb. Remember, we were the only country with an atomic bomb until 1949, when suddenly the Soviet Union obtained one. And there was this question, wait a minute, how is it that the Soviet Union, which was supposed to be so technologically far behind us, how could they get an atomic bomb as quickly as they did? Blame fell on the Rosenbergs. They indeed were members of the Communist Party. Julius's brother was also a technician who had worked on the Manhattan Project. Prosecutors would allege that Julius's brother gave Julius the information, and then Julius turned around and passed that on to the Soviet Union. Now, the evidence against them, in theory, was rather circumstantial. How many people worked on the Manhattan Project? How many people had access to this? How many people were potential spies that could have passed this information on? And there were questions surrounding the case. Even though they were convicted in 1951 and executed in 1953, there were people that always protested their innocence and said that these people were just being caught up in this Red Scare. I like to contrast the Rosenbergs and what happened to them with the case from the 1920s of Sacco and Vanzetti. You have these two people with this funny-sounding last name. They're different. They're accused of being communists during this huge Red Scare, and they're executed because we don't trust them. And that's what a lot of people said. Now, after the end of the Cold War, the government declassified something called Project Venona. Project Venona was a secret government program that was designed to spy on messages that were being passed to and by the Soviet Union. Project Venona, in subsequent years, as they've released information, their information proved that Julius did indeed pass the secrets for the atomic bomb on to the Soviet Union. They also proved that Ethel knew he was doing that. Now, whether or not knowledge of her husband's activities warranted the death penalty, there are some people that argue she was charged in order to try to get her to testify against her husband. So that's up for debate. But Julius indeed did spy for the Soviet Union and did pass the secrets of the atomic bomb to them. Now, during the Red Scare, there are people that are going to try to take advantage of it. One of them is this man named Joseph McCarthy. Joe McCarthy was a senator who, as he saw the Red Scare unfolding and he saw the people really being afraid of communism, he saw a chance to gain political popularity. And so he did what any good politician in this position is going to do. He starts to try to associate himself with hunting communists, and he starts to accuse people of being communists. The difference between Joe McCarthy and other people is he has little or no proof, or even made up proof, that these people are communists. Let me back up here just 1 second. If you'll notice the photograph that he has here, and you notice the political cartoon, that photograph is doctored. That photograph is completely made up. But Joe McCarthy would say, look, I have evidence of these people's guilt. Accusing someone with having, while you have little or no proof, or you're making up proof, is called McCarthyism. He will become politically popular as he goes after the State Department, as he goes after college professors, as he says, I am hunting down communists in the government to protect the people. And he became popular. He will go one step too far when he accuses the army of hiding communists. Now, at the beginning, people were shocked by this. How could the army that's supposed to protect us all be hiding communism and the officers be actively trying to hide communists? In 1954, there will be these things called the Army McCarthy hearings. The difference between these hearings and any of the others that McCarthy had been involved in was these were televised. Television was a new invention, and people were kind of looking for anything to watch. Well, this was going to be popular television, watching McCarthy go after these communists. And when they were televised, McCarthy thought this was going to be a way that he would be able to prove to people that he was indeed helping to save the country from communism. Instead, what ends up happening is people in America see the way McCarthy does it. They see McCarthy has no proof. They see that he just talks in circles and doesn't let the accused give a straight answer, and it backfires on him. And he will quickly lose his popularity, which is a good thing, because there was talk that in 1956 he was going to try to run for president against, he was going to try to get the Republican nomination from Dwight Eisenhower. And that would have been really interesting had that happened. Now, like I said, most of this was about politics, but we also cannot forget the Red Scare also involved American society. And so there's a lot of social effects. Okay? Those fears of communism and communist infiltration, whatever, they did affect popular culture. There were movies that were created. One of them was a movie called Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where you had people who they were taken by aliens and they were replaced, and they looked the same. They looked like your neighbor, but there was something off about them. There was something strange. Okay? And it was a way to talk about, this is what communism is. It looks that, people can be communists. They can look like normal people, but you can't trust them because they're communists. Public buildings that were built in the 1950s and into the 1960s many of them had installed in the basement fallout shelters. Places you could go and you could hide in the event of a nuclear attack. The goal of a fallout shelter is not to protect you from the blast. If you are in the target zone, you are going to die. The purpose of the fallout shelter was to protect people that were outside of the immediate blast zone from the debris and from the shockwave that would be coming. You'd run into the fallout shelter to protect yourself from the after effects of the initial attack. And so public buildings added these. Also, private homeowners added fallout shelters or bomb shelters. Some of them were homemade. Others could actually be bought from private companies. What you see here in the top right is an advertisement for a bomb shelter that you could buy and you could have installed in your backyard. It came with room for a family of 4, and it came with a prepackaged canned food, canned water, in case you needed to spend a couple of days down in your fallout shelter. The private ones that are built, the government estimates there were somewhere between 3,000 and 1 million private bomb shelters built during the Cold War. There's such a wide disparity in the numbers because if you did build a bomb shelter, you did not tell anyone about it. Because this was to protect your family, and you didn't build it big enough for your neighborhood, so you didn't want your neighbors to know about it out of fear that if something did happen, they would try to come and enter your bomb shelter. Another thing that happened during the Cold War was schools practiced air raid drills. This is one of the things I always like talking about. My dad, he was in school during this time, and he talked about having to practice the air raid drills. And in my hometown, which is about 25 miles south of Dallas, they would practice getting against the south wall because the blast was going to be coming from Dallas, and the shockwave was going to be coming from the north. Then, while he was still in school, AT&T built one of the first microwave communication towers in the country in my hometown. And it was going to be south of the school building, just a couple of miles. And he said that their air raid drills changed because now all of a sudden they had to get against the north wall because the blast was going to be coming from the south side of town. And as I asked him, I said, what did y'all think was the point of that? If a nuclear attack did happen, where it would have targeted? And his response was actually pretty interesting. It was, well, what were they going to tell a bunch of elementary kids? If it goes off, we're going to die? That's probably not a good way to do it. Okay? So, on the one hand, we think maybe that doesn't make any logical sense. On the other hand, you don't want to induce mass panic. So schools practice air raid drills. There is a great film that kind of is representative of exactly how crazy this all was. I'm going to link to it in the comments after I post this video. But it's a film called Duck and Cover. And it's about Bert the Turtle and how we need to duck and cover in the event of nuclear war. So I hope that was pretty quick. I hope that made a lot of sense. Hope I wasn't going too fast over the Red Scare.